What's up, everybody? We're about to jump into one of the most unbelievable podcasts that we've ever recorded here at the One's Ready studio. Kim Killer Chick Campbell, the legend, Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor, one of the only pilots to ever land an A-10 in the manual reversion mode. We had a great talk. I just want to say thanks to Rebels Creed. Shout out to the t-shirt. Thanks for everything that you guys are doing as a new company. Go check Rebels Creed out. You can find them on IG and on rebelscreed.com. So thanks to those guys. Here we go with the podcast. Kim Killer Chick Campbell. Thanks for everybody coming out. Here we go. Welcome back, everybody, to the One's Ready podcast. I can't actually believe I'm about to have this episode happen, but here we are. So Aaron, as you well know, hi, how are you? Friendly, local, neighborhood PJ. Today on the podcast, we have Kim Killer Chick Campbell. Ma'am, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, it's my honor. We were talking just before we got on here. I'm a bit of a fanboy. I've known your story since it happened as a young airman, and then young staff sergeant before I cross-trained back in a pararescue. So you were one of those people in the Air Force that I looked up to and sort of fanboyed a little bit over. So we're going to jump into that story now. But as always, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be in the Air Force?
Yeah, sure. I decided when I was in fifth grade that I was going to be a fighter pilot. So this was kind of a lifelong dream for me. Yeah.
Fifth grade. That's awesome. We'll talk about it. I know your dad was actually in the Air Force too. Is it because, grew up in a military family, or where did that love of flight come from?
Actually my dad got out of the Air Force, when I was born, right around that same time. So I didn't grow up as an Air Force brat.
Okay.
But, I decided I was going to be a fighter pilot. This was 1986. And women weren't actually allowed to be fighter pilots then. So that was, I didn't know that, which was probably a good thing. And
right.
I talked to my dad, who by then I had figured out he had been in the Air Force. And he said, well, if you want to be a fighter pilot, and my ultimate goal was to go on to become an astronaut. And so he said, if that's something that you want to do, then a lot of those astronauts are pilots. A lot of the pilots come from the Air Force Academy. That's probably your best bet. And so I kind of took that to heart, and that was it. Like, I was on this mission that I was going to go to the Air Force Academy and become a fighter pilot.
Pretty good. 5 years old. You already had it locked down from...
No, fifth grade, not 5 years old.
Okay.
Not quite that young.
That's still pretty early to figure out exactly what you wanted to do all the way through. So you show up at this academy, you get your service recommendation, and then you show up at the small technical school tucked into the Colorado Rockies, mostly for boys, that we know is the Air Force Academy. How hard was it when you showed up as a freshman to the Air Force Academy with these big dreams? Because now you're in competition land.
Yeah, well, I struggled to even get in. So I got rejected from the academy, my first attempt. And, so that meant that when I got there, it was like, I was finally there, and I was so thankful to be there that I was just like, I'm going to do whatever it takes to be successful and work really hard. So, getting that rejection, which was painful, because it was kind of everything that I had worked for. It turned out, I think, as a motivator for me, because at that point I was like, well, if they don't think I should be here, I barely made it in. I was like right down to the wire. They're like, well, somebody else turned down their appointment, so you can have it and you can show up. And that was like 2 weeks before basic training. So I was just very determined to do well, and really work hard, because you compete for pilot slots. And so I wanted to be at the top of my class to make sure that there was no doubt that I could go to pilot training.
We talk about using failure as a motivation all the time. That failure, that can fuel you. It gives you that immediate chip on your shoulder, and it makes you want to go compete against people. I loved hearing you say, like, you felt like you made it, and then you showed up as a freshman at the Air Force Academy. Those first couple of years as a plebe, not the most fun. What was your experience like as you went through those first 2 years?
Yeah, it's interesting. You finish high school, and almost everybody is at the top of their class. They are, they're elite in terms of they're elite athletes, or they're valedictorians, they're class presidents, and you show up and, well, now you're average, because everybody's like
everybody's a superstar, right?
Yeah. And so it's kind of this humbling experience. I mean, and then there's basic training, and you're at the bottom of the food chain anyway. But again, I think it comes down to just, one, you got to show up ready to go with the right mindset. And then the physical fitness is incredibly important for basic training. And so for me, it was all about, I was going to show up as ready as I could. And I worked out before I went to the tune of running in my combat boots in the hills of San Jose, California. I installed a pull-up bar. My dad installed the pull-up bar in my bathroom so I could max out the pull-ups, and so it helps to show up ready. But you kind of start out and you're around people that are excellent. And so it is tough. It's a competition, but at the same time, like, you are not going to succeed unless you work together as a team. So it's a really interesting dynamic because you are competing, but if you try to go solo, you will fail. You have to work together. So overall, like, I look back, I think I have forgotten a lot of the bad things, but I look back on my time at the Academy as like this really great time where I met a lot of really incredible people that got me towards the goal that I wanted. It's been 25 years, so I've dumped a lot of those bad memories.
Well, it's funny how quickly our brain just shuts that off, and you're just like, oh no, this was a great time. When you're going through it, you're like, this is the worst time I've ever had. I don't really want to go through it again, right? Absolutely not. Somebody, there's always the question like, okay, how do you think you would do an A&S? I'd be like, pass. No, I don't think I'd do well at all. I think I wouldn't even want to try at this point.
Yeah.
I do want to highlight something. Yeah. Oh yeah. So you were a wing commander, a cadet wing commander. So you went from almost not getting in to being essentially the highest ranking student in your cadet wing. How did you feel? Did you feel like accomplished? Did you feel like, was that chip on your shoulder just kind of still like, I knew I could do this? Or how did you feel when you were in a leadership position as a student?
Yeah, I felt like I had earned my way there. Like, I had worked really hard to get in, and there, maybe my scores competing with everybody weren't quite as good. But SAT scores only get you so far. And then, it's a lot of it's a lot more, certainly than that. And so I really did feel like, I'd worked my butt off while I was there. And it was kind of like, look, you made the right choice, right? You allowing me to get into the Academy, you made the right choice. So I felt, I guess, accomplished. And then also, it wasn't, when I was a freshman, I actually got a call from the admissions office to go see the admissions office.
Oh, no.
Well, and of course, I was a freshman. I was totally worried. But I had actually sent them letters every week once I got that rejection letter to say, like, hey, if somebody doesn't want their spot, I'm here, I'm ready, I'm available. And so they kind of knew me because I had sent these letters every week. So it was like they wanted to meet me and get to know me. So I felt like at that point, I'm like, all right, I earned my spot here.
Nice. And you actually got to share that with your dad. You were the first father and daughter wing commander pair that had ever happened. Is that true?
Yeah, it's pretty cool because my dad graduated with the class of 1970 and he was the wing commander when he was there. So to have that, to walk down the hallway with all the pictures of the cadet wing commanders and like see my dad and then see me and realize like he still is. He's always been kind of my role model and my hero. And to achieve that same thing that he did was pretty cool.
What a fantastic thing from not even like realizing that he was in the Air Force to that evolution to sharing that had to be a big deal for you and your relationship. That's awesome. Good on the both of you.
Yeah.
So we graduate the Academy in 97. You get your first assignment. When you tracked out of school, did you go immediately into UPT or how did that work?
I actually spent a few years in the UK. I went to grad school on a Marshall Scholarship program. So I spent 2 years as a second lieutenant, not wearing a uniform, studying in the UK. And what a fantastic experience. I mean, to get outside and see something from a different perspective and work with all these different international students was just a great way for me to broaden out a little bit. And then at the same time, I was so anxious to get back to pilot training because I was watching all my friends go through and they're getting the fighters and the things that they want. I'm anxious to get there. So 2-year delay due to grad school. But in the long run was the right choice to do that for sure.
Where in the UK did you go?
I went to the University of Reading first for a degree in international security studies. And then I did an MBA at the University of London.
Oh, nice. Peaches and I both spent time at the 321st down at Milton Hall. So familiar with that area. Yeah. So 2 years behind you. Now you're an accomplished grad school graduate. You're super duper smart. And now you're ready to actually get into pilot training. Yeah. So
I'm anxious to get to pilot
training. And once again, we step in on a kind of like day one, like, hi, I've got this degree now. And now I'm 2 years kind of behind my peer group as far as pilots go. And you show up. How did you prepare at all for UPT? How did you keep yourself on track in those 2 years?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit hard to prep completely because you can do some studying and things, but until you're in it, it's really hard to kind of know what's going to go on and know really how to prep yourself. And I think the thing for me is I went in with this, like, I hadn't spent, I wasn't just at the academy. I had time to kind of decompress from that experience and really just,
Sure.
I was energized and I was ready and ready to like study and really commit to it. And so I really just, I showed up there and I was ready to go. I mean, I was just going to work my butt off to get the fighter that I wanted. Because again, I knew that was going to be competitive to get a fighter pilot slot.
Right. And which fighter did you want? Was it always the A-10?
No, I didn't know what I wanted at the time when I started. I didn't, I was like this idea. I wanted to go fly fighters, but I didn't really know which one. And it took me really, 6 to 9 months of really just talking to other pilots and learning about the missions and then flying when I realized that like the formation work, the close in formation work, it was cool. I mean, don't get me wrong, but it was like, okay, that's cool. But then we got to the low levels and I was like, ooh, this is fun. I like this. And pilot training, you're not like, you're not dropping bombs or shooting the gun or anything like that. It's just very basic. So you don't really get into that. But I talked to a lot of pilots and I realized for me, that mission of close air support was it just resonated with me. It was like, so my primary mission is to go support these guys on the ground and get them home safely to their families. Like, I can relate to that. Like, that's something that I want to do.
Okay. Well, we sort of breezed right by this one, but when you got into the Air Force Academy, you didn't even know, when did the exclusion for female fighter pilots happen? Like, when did that go away?
So that went away my senior year in high school. So 1993, when I graduated high school. So yeah, I mean, I didn't really know about it. And I think senior year in high school, I had this recognition. I was actually in a debate class and we were talking about women in combat. And so it was like, oh, wait a second, this thing I want to do, I'm not actually allowed to do it right now. But thankfully it was lifted. There were women that came before me that, kind of got the first knocked out of the way, which is always nice.
Always good. Yeah. You never want to be the first. I'd rather be a good fifth than a first.
Yeah. Well, and there was a lot of initial struggles. So there weren't a lot of women when I showed up anyway. I mean, I was in a handful of maybe a couple women anyway, but it was nice that there were women that went before me. Yeah,
that paved the way. So we're getting through UPT. You do well. You make the decision and you go A-10. What was your first flight like in the A-10?
It takes a little bit to get there because we got to go through survival training and water survival and all those fun things. But, so it was about 6 months after I graduated from pilot training and I went on to A-10 training at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona. And you do so much preparation leading to it because the A-10 is single seat. I mean, there are no flyable 2-seat A-10s. And so the first time you fly, you're by yourself. So there's a lot of preparation, a lot of simulators before. The first time you fly is actually fairly like basic. You're not doing a lot. You're going to go out, you're going to do some instrument work. But that moment of taking off and like, it's like the second of, you're excited for about a second and then it's total focus on what you're doing.
Right.
But you're really not an A-10 pilot till you shoot the gun. So you got to knock out like 8 flights and then you go shoot the gun and you're like, okay, now I've made it.
And now I've made it.
Now I can wear the patch.
Fantastic. We talk about that a lot. Like, you think you've made it. There's all these times in your career. Every once in a while, I'll throw my beret on and I'll go to walk into a building or something. And I'll have this distinct feeling of like, oh crap, you're a PJ.
Yeah.
Like, holy cow, okay, cool. I imagine the first time you rip off a couple squeezes of that 30 millimeter, I imagine that for you, that was the same thing.
Yeah. You're like, okay, this fighter pilot thing that I've always wanted to do, like, I've got it, like I'm here, but then you land and then you debrief and you're like, I still have a long way to go.
Right.
It's like the next thing, I got to get combat mission ready. I've got to become a flight lead, an instructor, go to combat. It just, I don't know. I don't know that it ever ends.
Right. When was that first assignment at DM?
That was it was 2001 because I was in A-10 training when 9/11 happened.
What an unbelievable scenario for you.
Yeah.
For you to have this road from, I think I want to do this thing, to trying to struggle to get into the academy, to getting everything that it is that you had laid out. And there had to be some part of your brain that was like, I've done all this work and I'm here to answer the call, but I sort of wish there was something going on. What was that 9/11 experience like for you at the fighter squadron?
I mean, unreal. I think like for everybody, it was just this moment of one shock, but also it was like a reality check. It was, we're at war. I think we completely knew that. I mean, we were under attack. It was very apparent the way that the base responded. And I think at that point I knew that like my life as a A-10 pilot, as an Air Force officer, was about to change pretty dramatically. But prior to this, I mean, the A-10 was kind of just, a little bit on the chopping block in many ways. And so 9/11, changed for us. I mean, we deployed nonstop. I finished A-10 training in December of 2001, got to my unit, Pope Air Force Base, and we deployed a couple months later. I mean, brand new A-10 pilot, and I'm deploying first to support Operation Southern Watch in Kuwait, and then we moved into Afghanistan for Enduring Freedom. I mean, it was a fast turn.
It was. What was the? Go ahead, man. I was
going to say, it was like, you do all this training for the reality of combat. I think there's, at the time, before 9/11, it was like, well, will we go? Will we not? Will there be an opportunity to do what we've trained to do? And there was an opportunity. It happened very quickly. So it was like there was this renewed focus on everything that we were doing.
Yeah. And at that point, the only thing you had was AARs from really Desert Storm, Gulf 1 and 2, where the A-10 was, obviously a, key to our victory there. But there's only so much that you can get from those AARs. The PJs in my peer group, we felt the same thing. Like we were there to receive this information, but really before that 2001 era, you didn't have any combat tested PJs, CCT, TACP. It was, we were talking about doing dangerous things and training for war, but that completely changed. So by the time that I got back to the schoolhouse in, 2004, 2005, there was like weird mixes of people that had 3 deployments under their belt, 3 or 4. And then there were some of the older, the older PJs, those 90s PJs that just didn't have the chance to see it. It was a weird time.
Yeah, it was, I look back and thankfully we did have some of the experience from the Desert Storm pilots, because I remember specifically one night on a Friday night in the bar, because that's where we learned a lot of our things.
Amen.
We were at the bar, and one an A-10 pilot who had flown Desert Storm, Rob Sweet, he was shot down on prisoner of war during Desert Storm. And he came in to just talk to us and share his experience. And, it was a reality check for us as well. But also it was just, sharing those lessons. And at the time, I had no idea how critical those lessons would be, because he talked about getting hit. He talked about battle damage, not just his experience, but also the experience of some of the other A-10 pilots. And it was like, at the time, you're just trying to soak it all in and hope that those things never happen to you. And I just, it's a good thing I listened. Let's put it that way.
well, absolutely. So that kind of brings us to the 2003 mission. So you had your time. You supported Southern Watch, and you had a good deployment there. You came home. You went to Afghanistan, and really those second deployment, that's when your aperture starts opening up, and it's maybe the outside looks different sometimes. Especially during GWAT, you look outside your window, and sometimes there's mountains and desert, and then sometimes there was just desert. So that would tell you which country you deployed to. But this time you found yourself in Iraq. What did in what status did you deploy? At the beginning of that deployment, were you a flight lead? Were you in a leadership position, or were you? I hate to say just a pilot. But.
I was just a wingman. At this point, we had spent some time in Afghanistan, and then our unit turned very quickly to pivot to Iraq. So we came home from Afghanistan, and our unit wasn't actually the one that was supposed to go. It really should have been our sister squadron. But I'm not sure what happened behind the scenes. I was just a wingman, but we were selected to go again. And my husband happened to be in the sister squadron, so this is a long-term discussion for us.
So right, yeah.
But we were selected to go again, and I think we were all, that's what we wanted. We wanted, like, if there was a war that was going to happen, we wanted to be there because we knew we could make a difference and we can make an impact. And so we left late February, landed in Kuwait March 1st. And, it was very apparent to me that this was different than the first time I landed in Kuwait, because there were aircraft that, I think we were the last A-10s to show up on the ramp. Mm-hmm. And there were just aircraft as far as we could see. I mean, it was just this wall-to-wall of A-10s and rescue helicopters. And it was a huge buildup. So I think at that point, we knew that this was different. Iraq was different. The threat was different. So much so that our squadron commander had us write notes home to our families before we could fly. Like, if we didn't make it, there was at least a letter that he could deliver to our families. So, that put things into perspective pretty quick.
That's tough. How did you feel about that?
It's one of those things you're like, well, I guess I got to write it, because
right.
Otherwise you're not going to fly. So I still have the letters. I haven't read them. I don't know.
I don't know if you should. Yeah.
I don't either. I didn't have kids at the time, so I wrote a letter to my parents, a letter to my brother, and a letter to my husband. But I think it was just like, okay, knock this out, get this done so I can fly. But you try not to dwell on the potential reality. I think you prepare for it, but you don't dwell on it. And then you move on.
Yeah, it's a sobering reality. And oftentimes we'll get DMs of people. I answered one the other day where, a young man was asking me, he said, hey, I've always wanted to serve in GWAT. GWAT's over. I don't know if I want to serve anymore because I can't serve in that capacity. I really want to go to war. And at this point in my life, I'm like, hey, my friend, that is not a thing. Like, no. we do not wish for war in this thing. No. We're happy. I'm proud of my service in GWAT and I'm proud of the deployments I've had, but I wouldn't, if there was one thing that I could turn off, like king for a day, we wouldn't go to war. We wouldn't have done it. But
I totally agree with you. When it happens, you want to be a part of it to support your brothers and sisters, like to do your job. But I wouldn't. No, I don't. You don't wish for it. It's there's too much bad associated with it.
Yes, ma'am. Perspective of wisdom, we'll call it that.
Yeah.
So we get in, you're out of Kuwait, you see just every single aircraft in the world on the ramp, and you have this sobering feeling that things are going to be a little bit different. Where did the 2003 mission fall in that deployment? So you got there in March. Mm-hmm. Did you have some time under your belt beforehand, or where did this actually fall in your deployment window?
I had flown about 10 missions up to this point. Since I was a wingman, I wasn't even sure that they were going to take me on the deployment. And then I got there and I thought, well, maybe I'll just work in the mission planning cell. They may not let me fly. Mm-hmm. And then we needed every pilot we could get. We ended up bringing more pilots over. So I had flown about 10 missions as a wingman. We combat paired with another pilot. So as a wingman, I would fly with an experienced flight lead, which was fantastic. We'd fly with each other for about 2 weeks. So I had just switched over to a new combat pair. We had flown a couple missions together. But at this point, so our primary mission was to support the Army. Mm-hmm. And they were moving all the way to Baghdad and moving pretty quickly. And so by April 6th, 5th, 6th, 7th, in that time frame, we're in Baghdad now. And so now, for us, this idea that we're doing close air support in downtown Baghdad was, when we first heard that, we were like, what? That's the super MES, missile engagement zone, is what we called it. It's surrounded by surface to air missiles. Now, a lot of that was taken out by the time we got there, but we knew that this was going to be very different than Afghanistan for that reason. But that's where the ground troops were, so that's where we were going. And so it was quiet, may not be the right word. It was a little bit more quiet on the way to Baghdad. Like, there wasn't as much resistance, we'll put it that way. Mm-hmm. And then we get to Baghdad, and now we're doing, close air support missions, troops in contact missions, every day. And so much so that they're just stacking these airplanes up around Baghdad so that if someone makes a call, someone can just float right in. So that's kind of the time frame where all this happened was, we're now in Baghdad, and things changed dramatically.
Did that feel surreal to you when you were flying in that stack on stack on stack of aircraft? Was there ever a time where you stood back and you were just you felt like you were in some people describe it as a video game, or some people describe it as a dream. Did that ever feel surreal to you?
It does. I think it's surreal because it's like everything that you train for, right? It's all those things that you plan for, but to actually see it, for me, that happened on the April 7th mission. A lot of the times we were probably getting shot at, we just didn't know. Mm-hmm. And then, April 7th, all of a sudden, that mission, we ended up a lot lower than we normally are. So I could see a firefight. Like I could see the tracers. I could see the smoke. It was just surreal to me. And it's kind of a half second of realization of like, this is everything that we train for. This is exactly what we plan for. There's this moment or not hesitation, but the second of like, I don't want to mess this up. Like this is it. Like I got to do everything that I've trained to do. It's just this moment of it's surreal, and then it has to pass, right? Because then you're like, focus, 100% focus on what I'm doing.
So here we are. We're in the fight. You get the call. There was another mission that you were going to go support, and then I believe the call was for troops in contact, and you got diverted, and you had to do exactly that. You had to go in with lives on the line and people calling for your help. Yeah, you're in. How did that go? Like, what was the first thing that happened where you realized, like, this is a different one?
I think, the weather that day was terrible. So we could not actually see the ground. And for us then, you had to get below the weather. It was it was a requirement. Right. So we weren't really sure we were going to be able to do anything. And then, you get a call for troops in contact and you're like, well, we're going to figure this out. And so my flight lead just found a hole in the clouds and dove down through. Then I'm like solo in Iraq by myself above the clouds. And he's like, all right, Casey, you can come down below the weather too. And so I found a hole in the clouds and just, dove down through. And that's when I broke out. And it was like, wow, one, I'm a lot lower than we normally are because we're below the weather. Mm-hmm. And just to see it set up, it was right over the Tigris River. Our guys were on the west side of the river, and then enemy on the east side. Targets, in terms of like a deviation of the target from friendly and enemy, doesn't get much better than that to have a river in between. Yeah. That's a very nice differentiating feature. Makes us feel a lot safer. We know exactly where the friendlies are and the enemy is. And, but I could see like these, there was just flashes and smoke. It was just, it was so surreal for that second. And then it's like, immediately we're talking about, we're going to roll in with guns. We have to get, our target was underneath the bridge. Mm-hmm. So for us, that's forward firing. We got to either shoot rockets or gun to get underneath the bridge. My flight lead was immediate. He saw the target. He rolled in from north to south as I'm just coming down below the weather. And the JTAC said, not effective. It's got to come in from south to north just based on where the enemy was at. Mm-hmm. So now there's only one way we can come in and really one way we can come out. So we're very predictable. So, and we're talking about this. So we decide we'll just do a couple passes and then climb up, kind of get our energy back, reassess things. So we each did 2 passes, a gun pass and a rocket pass. And then on my last pass, he's like, all right, after this pass, we're going to climb up and reassess things. I rolled in on that last pass. I remember kind of just fine tuning my aim point right underneath the bridge, hit the weapons release button, the pickle button, pulled off target. Just, trying to climb and get my energy back. I'm heavy, full of weight, full of weapons, and just felt this, this huge explosion at the back of the airplane. There is no doubt in my mind. Like I knew immediately what had happened. I'd equate it to like getting rear-ended in a car crash, like at high speed. It kind of threw me over. I remember seeing this bright red-orange fireball. And then I did kind of the instinctive thing as the jet nosed over. I pulled back on our control stick and just nothing happened. This is like, this is not good. It's kind of that second of reality of like, this could go really badly as I'm seeing Baghdad getting closer. I remember like this half second of looking at my ejection handles and thinking, this is not going to go well. This is the last thing that I want to do. And so I reverted to my training. Like it was this instant of like, things slow down, I guess, in some ways. Like I remember seeing all of these things, but at the same time, I'm reacting. I've got to do something to survive. And so I go back to my training of analyze the situation, figure out what the hell's going wrong, and could see this we have this caution panel over on our right side, and it's like there's so many lights on it. I'm trying to decipher what's most important.
Terrifying.
And I look at the top, and we've got hydraulic lights that are for pressure and the reservoir levels, and they're all on for both sides of the airplane, left and right. And I look up at the hydraulic gauges just above, and they're completely at zero. So at this point, I have two options. I eject over the enemy. Not really a good option. Not one I'm going to take.
Yeah.
And then we have a backup system. And so thankfully I, flip that switch, and it actually, the airplane starts flying again.
During this whole time, did you ever hear the words? We talked about it before. I believe the instructor was his last name Sweet, that had been the previous A-10 pilot who was actually a prisoner of war.
Yeah. That's a good question.
I hear those words in my head, and instructors and mentors of mine, and I have distinct memories of being deployed and having extremely terrible things. And I hear the instructor go, "Aaron, you've got to do this. You've got to do this. Here, you got to go here." Did you ever?
I heard his voice along with. I'd read the book Warthog, which talks about pilots in Desert Storm, and I knew those stories of pilots that had been hit. I think this moment right in itself was so dynamic and happened so fast. I don't remember thinking through that. As soon as I flipped the switch and now I'm flying, and now I'm like, okay, now this, I don't know how long I'm going to be flying for. This airplane could quit. And it was like, okay, just get out of Baghdad, get above the weather. And then if I have to eject, at least then my chances of survival and escape are higher.
Mm-hmm.
Then those voices start coming in, especially when my flight lead says, all right, Casey, you got to think about if you want to jump out of the airplane or get it back to friendly territory and land. And that's when all of those stories, all of those lessons start kind of flooding in of I remember this situation, the first pilot that tried landing in manual reversion. I remember the stories from other A-10 pilots of how they flew in manual reversion. And so I think that's why I'm so passionate about the importance of sharing stories and those lessons learned, those Friday nights in the bar, right? They're so important, because in those critical moments, that's when you hear the voices. That's when, they're not there, obviously, over Baghdad, but their stories are, their experiences are. I remember them, and I think that's what helped me get back safely.
Well, and now you're in the fight. Most importantly, hey, you took that initial hit. Okay, now we're in manual reversion. Okay, great. But now we're in the fight and you're flying back. When did you put it together that the aircraft was so irreparably damaged? Was it on the flight back?
Yeah, I think, I couldn't see the damage. So we have mirrors up in our cockpit, and I was trying to angle them to see the damage in the back, and I couldn't see anything. So my flight lead pulled up next to me to do a battle damage check, which is that look over our airplane. It's actually the picture back behind me is us on the way back. Kind of that battle damage check. And he said that I had hundreds of holes in the fuselage and tail section, and then the big hole in the fuselage, in the horizontal stabilizer, which is kind of the back tail section. So I knew it wasn't good. I mean, I had all sorts of emergency indications and cautions, and it was flying. That's about all I can say. It was flying. It was not flying well, but it was flying, and all I wanted to do was get out of Baghdad. Get out of Baghdad. That was okay, if I can get out of Baghdad and then I have to eject, at least it's more open space. And then it was okay, I'm out of Baghdad. Let's get to friendly territory. Let's make it back to Kuwait. And thankfully my, fuel tank stayed full. I had no problems with fuel. We were very heavy. We had all sorts of gas because we had just filled up when we got to Baghdad. So we overflew Talil Air Base, which at the time we had positioned aircraft in, and I think there was one fire truck. So that was our decision to overfly Talil, is if I crashed on landing, that one fire truck, no hospital, potentially not a great situation. So, these are the kinds of conversations we're having. Okay, well, if you crash, you probably want an ambulance and a fire truck, we're talking reality. Definitely makes you think about the worst case scenarios. And
absolutely. Well, life becomes binary. It's ones and zeros at that point. You're alive. You're in the fight. Am I flying? Yes or no?
Yep.
All right. Yep. Okay. Next problem.
Yep.
If I have to crash this bad boy, am I going to be able to walk away from it? Maybe not. Okay. Yes or no? Let's figure it out. Let's go. You get ready.
Yeah.
What airbase did you end up landing at?
We ended up landing back in Kuwait, back at our home base, which was, it's in friendly territory. So if I have to eject at the last second, I'm at least in Kuwait. There's rescue helicopters right there.
Right. You made the decision to land. You're getting on short final. You were flying yourself by wires and pulleys and like straight up Wright Brothers stuff. And an aircraft that should be shot down. After providing close air support. Now, by the way, we glossed over it. You hit your target on that last run and you did neutralize that threat on your way out. What were you thinking as you were on short final and you were about to put this aircraft out? It was yard 06. Is that correct?
That was my call sign. Yeah.
Okay.
I think at that point, it's just like a little bit of prayer that you make it out, that you do the right thing, that you don't mess it up. Honestly, I was also thinking about the pilots that had come before me. I knew about their experiences. There were 3 pilots that tried to land in manual reversion during Desert Storm. The first pilot was killed, crashed on landing, and I knew about that story. I knew what he had done and the lessons that we had learned from that. And so I was very cautious about having that in the back of my mind, knowing what I needed to do, which was to fly this power on landing, fly it all the way to the ground. And, I had those, I knew I wasn't going to have brakes. I wasn't going to have steering. I wasn't going to have my speed brakes to slow me down. I mean, it was all just a lot of things I didn't have. And so I remember the stories of the pilots that came before me and focused on just controlling the airplane, just keeping it steady. And then when those wheels hit the ground, relief is like this. I don't know. It's not the right word. It's the word I use because I was so relieved, but it was so much bigger than that. It was just like this, okay, I'm going to live. That's really what it came down to, was this reality of like, okay, I made it. I'm going to live. I'm not going to die today. Today's not my day. And so, intense relief. I don't know. And then I'm like, but I hear this voice. I'm like, so in this moment, I'm like, oh, thank God I'm on the ground. And then I hear this voice of like, hey, Casey, you can stop the airplane now. Because I was just rolling slowly down the runway at this point. At this point, I don't care. Like, I'm so
absolutely.
Slow. You're like, so long. And the fire trucks are like, is she going to stop?
They're like, Casey, they're like telling you to pull over. Pull over.
Yeah, pull over. And so I only had 5 brake applications. So it wasn't like I wanted to jam on the brakes right away. This was an emergency backup braking system. So I eventually used a couple of those pushed down on the brakes and got the airplane stopped. And then I was like, I want to get out. I want to see the damage.
Right. And what you got out, and you saw the aircraft, what did you feel?
Shock, I think, that it's dripping with hydraulic fluid. I mean, the airplane is just dripping with fluid. The backside of the airplane was black from a fire, like charred. There are holes everywhere. And I realized the holes aren't just in the back of the airplane. That's where most of them are. But there's holes up near the cockpit, around some of the fuel tanks. The engine took shrapnel damage. So it's a little bit more extensive, I think, than I originally thought. And I remember there were a bunch of Marines that were the firefighters there. And they're just like looking at the airplane, looking at me like with this, you just landed this thing, look. And I'm thinking the same thing, like, I just landed this thing. So.
Oh, how long did it take before you started talking shit to everybody? Was it immediate? I imagine it's immediate. Be like, not only did I land this, I'm one of the only, maybe a handful, 4 pilots that have ever tried it. I would have done it right away, but I think it's because I'm not as good a person as you, Casey.
I think I don't, what, for me, I was just so thankful that I was on the ground. I was it was just such a, I don't know, you're on this adrenaline high for so long. And it took me a while to come down from that. And I think it was just more of this thankfulness that I survived, that I got home. It was, I don't know, it was just to be around the guys in my squadron, like, I don't know, they're like my brothers, and so they were just so happy to see me. And I don't know, there wasn't a lot of shit talking. It was more just this like, I think we were all just happy that I was back and I was on the ground safe.
I knew you were a better person than me. That's a great answer. So How much time, like after this event, like after this mission, how much time did you spend in that deployment? Did you go back up and fly some more missions and then just continue as fragged and go home after that? Or how did that flow?
Yeah, so my flight lead the next day, we were tasked to sit combat search and rescue alert. And I don't know if that was an intentional choice, but normally when we sit CSAR alert, it's like we sleep, read,
CSAR,
relax.
come sit and relax. That's what CSAR means.
Yeah, until someone gets shot down and then you launch, which is exactly what happened on April 8th.
Oh, great. Yeah. So right away, you're right back in the cockpit.
Yeah. So, the alarm sounded. We kind of look at each other like, is this a drill? Because they would do drills. And no, I mean, it came in immediately. An A-10 pilot had been shot down in Baghdad, so now I'm going right back where we were yesterday. But I didn't even think about it. It was like race out to the jet as fast as you can, get in, start, figure out where this pilot is, what shut him down, what's his condition, how do we get the helicopters in? It was just those guys were there for me the day before. And so I was going to do the same for him. I mean, there was no doubt in my mind. And I didn't even think about it, which honestly was like the best way for me to get back in the airplane.
100%.
Think about it, just go do the mission. And, after that, we were there for another, I think, 5 months flying missions. So
okay, we do the same thing.
Go ahead.
We do the same thing with cutaways, like you getting right back and being forced to go. Especially like when you're a student, we do it. Even when you're further in your career, if you have a cutaway under a parachute, the very first thing you do is you put on another parachute and you immediately go back up and you just do a slick jump, just go chill out. Like it's the best way to get back into it. Cause I imagine if you spent a lot of time on the ground ruminating and had enough time to think about a scheduled flight, I bet that you would have had a little bit more anxiety getting back to that aircraft.
I think for sure. There's no doubt in my mind. I mean, we compartmentalized pretty well, which is what I did after this mission. I kind of tucked it away to deal with later. But this was hard, this was a hard one to compartmentalize. So just getting back in the air and kind of realizing that I could get back in the air, do the mission, and I was going to be okay was important.
Mm-hmm. So you got back home and the lore of Killer Chick Campbell starts. Yeah. And you, I imagine that you're still on a deployment cycle. I imagine you get back home. So you were at Pope at the time when you deployed out and you got back. What did your assignment flow look like after that?
So I stayed with the 75th at Pope for another deployment. We went back to Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. So I ended up, my first assignment, I think I was at Pope for 4 years. It was unheard of. Usually you're somewhere for 2, but we were just deploying so frequently. And by then I had upgraded to flight lead while we were in Iraq. I upgraded to an instructor and, they needed experienced pilots that had deployed. So I, stayed with the unit. Came home from Afghanistan. My husband had already left to go to Nellis Air Force Base to work at weapons school. Mm-hmm. And so I followed him a year later to the test squadron where we transitioned the A-10A to the A-10C, which was awesome. We got to drop and shoot everything that the A-10 could carry, which is a lot.
Get it.
So pretty good time to be at the test squadron there with my husband at the weapons school. And from there, we went on to... we thought we were going to DC to the Pentagon. We're like, we got to go do our staff tour. Mm-hmm. Ended up going to school for a year with the Army at Command and General Staff College. And then went back to Davis-Monthan to teach the next generation of A-10 pilots. And so that was fantastic. Got to do squadron command while I was there. Then finally got pulled to go to the Pentagon. Not our favorite choice, but knew that it was coming. Yeah. And then we did get out of there and back to Davis-Monthan to do group command for me and then wing command for my husband. There was another deployment in there to Afghanistan. This time for me, it was on the ground working in the ISAF Joint Command. Mm-hmm. Not my favorite deployment. Wasn't flying A-10s.
When was that, man?
It was 2010.
Okay. Yeah, I was Iraq in 2009 and 10 or something. So we just missed each other there.
It's a different environment, to go back and see it almost 10 years later.
I bet.
Yeah. And then finished out my career at the Air Force Academy. I got the opportunity to teach in the Military and Strategic Studies Department and then tried to retire a few times in there. It didn't happen. And finished out my final year as the director at the Center for Character and Leadership Development. So kind of came full circle for me, back to the academy, back where I started, back where I met my husband, just it's a nice way to finish things off.
Yeah, but you weren't done there. So you decided to engage in some other stuff. Obviously, you were awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor for your actions in 2003 and had a full career all the way up to 06 after that. But you still weren't done giving back. So your post-Air Force life involves a lot of public speaking. It involves a lot of talking to people. Why did you decide to keep serving in the way that you did?
I think I've spent 24 years serving, and it's hard. It's hard to walk away from that. I enjoyed it. I loved it. I had found my passion and my purpose with supporting our troops on the ground. And when I stopped flying the A-10, it was like, okay, find your new passion and purpose. And I realized how important it was to give back. And being at the academy was like this opportunity to help the next generation of leaders. And so retiring was still a hard decision for me. I mean, I tried 3 times and I finally, did it on the 3rd time around.
It finally stuck.
Yeah, it finally stuck. And I wanted to find a way to continue that service. And, like I said, people shared stories with me along my career. They shared their experiences. They shared their lessons learned, even if it was like, hey, I screwed this up. They shared those things with me. And so now it's like, I feel a responsibility to share what I've learned with other people. I mean, it's not all success. There's failures, there's mistakes. And so I feel a bit of a responsibility to share those things to help other people develop and grow. And that's part of the speaking. It's why I decided to write a book. It's just, I think it's important. I think you can help other people by sharing stories and sharing lessons learned. It's nice to be able to give back because I feel like so many people did so many things for me along the way.
Yep, we are 100% going to plug the book. We'll put it in the comments and we'll put it out there when the episode drops. So fantastic, and thank you for everything that you did in your military service. And this one hits close to my heart. As we were kind of talking last night before the podcast, I said, hey, if there's any passion projects or something that you want to talk about, and immediately you hit me with the Special Operations Transition Foundation or SOTF.org. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is meant to do?
Yeah, so I joined the board for the Special Operations Transition Foundation, and it was like this. I had spent my whole career supporting our troops on the ground, so why not continue to do it? And I think one of the things that we struggle with when we leave the military or decide to leave the military is how do we transition? What's next? How do I do this next chapter of my life? And, our special operators have given so much to this country, have, deployed so frequently, especially in this current generation. And so helping them find the next that transition to do something that's positive and important, has an impact. I think sometimes we can undersell the things that we've done. And so helping them to, understand all the amazing things that they've done and how that translates to corporate America. I think that's so important. And so our foundation does that. We help special operators from all the community, all the services, transition out. We're ideally looking for about 12 to 18 months from retirement or separation. Mm-hmm. And then there's career coaching, there's mentoring, there's ability to help you figure out what you want to do, where you want to do it, find the career field that fits for you. And then it's like a flight following. We're going to support you all along the way. We're going to help you, introduce you to connections. We're going to help you get interviews, walk you through that process. And then, ideally help you find that next job, that's going to be of interest for you and that's going to help you and your family succeed in kind of the next chapter. So I think it's really important when we talk about kind of the resilience of our force and of our veterans, helping people transition is really important. And there's a lot of foundations and agencies out there that can help. And so it's really just helping people be aware that there are so many people out there that are willing to help. And, I kind of found my home with SOTF and the work that they do.
Well, as a guy that's been supported by the A-10 in my active duty life, and as a guy that's in that 12 to 18 month window, that's probably going to be knocking on your door here very soon to talk about this stuff. I can't say thank you enough for this initiative. I did doing the research on it and figuring out exactly what it was. Your support, your input, your professionalism, your help with this project is just absolutely unparalleled. And the fact that you found a way to take what you've done your entire career and really help other people continually when you didn't have to that just speaks to your character. And ma'am, I just want to say thank you for everything that you've done. That's a righteous cause, and that's awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's, it's all about finding your passion and your purpose and what's important to you, and focusing on that. And so, it's about finding that camaraderie again and finding your passion, even on the outside of the military.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, ma'am, that feels like a good place to end. So I'm going to hit you with the question that we always ask our guests. So you've done, from getting into the Air Force Academy to becoming an A-10 pilot to having, one of the, the top missions, just absolutely insane missions, and the things that you've done all along your way. Each one of those things is an impossible task. We speak directly to people that are going to try to do something with a 91% failure rate, some things that look impossible, just for the chance to go and do what you did, which is, almost give your life for the nation. What piece of advice would you give to people that are trying to do this impossible task?
I think it comes down to work hard, have a good attitude, and don't be afraid to fail. I mean, I think you're going to fail at some point. You're going to make mistakes. And so it's so important of how you respond in that moment. How will you respond to failure? If you put in the work and you have a good attitude, then acknowledge the mistakes, acknowledge the failures, learn from it, don't do it again, and then move on. And if you want to do something that is hard, then you've got to put in the work. And it's not going to be an easy road, but it is so worth it in the end.
Crushed it, ma'am. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming in and talking to us, everybody. Check out the onesready.com site. You can see everything. Our reading list will be updated immediately after this with Casey's book. So Kim, Killer Chick Campbell, ma'am, thanks for coming on. Everybody else, shoot us a DM over at the IG account. Find us wherever you have your podcast. As always, train hard. Have a good one.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks, ma'am.